DIY! Thank you so much for stopping by. I want to show you how you can replace your deck by yourself and get a professional result, even if you have no experience like myself. Over the summer, I was quoted $32,000 to replace my 14 by 16 deck. And that was absolutely outrageous, right? I asked for a composite top and a new substructure because my old deck had rotted a hole in my whole house. So I couldn't afford that, so what I did was replaced it myself, and now it's almost 500 square feet. It's absolutely stunning and cost less than a third of what the original quote was. So I hope that you stay tuned to see all the steps that I took, including permitting. So smash that subscribe button to stay here, and let's get started. When I bought the house, it had a 12 by 14 wooden deck, and it was completely rotten through. There was holes in it, and then in the back area off the deck there was this little area that had like a fireplace around but wasn't really functional. On a random Friday night, I decided I was done with this thing rotting a hole in my house because it had never been spaced from the house, and I already had to pay $2,500 to replace the sliding glass door. So I took my jigsaw and a sledgehammer and started removing the old deck. My goodness, this was so hard, but it did only take me one day, but that one day was like 12 hours of labor. And then I also separated the old materials and kept some of it to create planter boxes. Then I went to Lowe's, obviously, to gather some materials to get me started. I don't own a truck, so I had a lot of materials delivered, and the forklift damaged some of that, unfortunately, so some of my Trex boards as well as my cement were damaged. However, Lowe's made it more than right, and I'll explain that later. After cleaning up the area, I found that it had stairs and also an entire slab, and so many people were like, oh, just make a patio, but that's not the vision, baby. We're making a beautiful deck. So let's demo this brick and get it out of here. This thing is from 1988 and is absolutely older than me, so I'm gonna tear it out. Clearly, I am not a mason, so I just took a 15-pound sledgehammer and started breaking the brick out. I did try to like wedge most of it out like this, but I made a lot of mistakes, clearly. Ultimately, I was able to save probably around 60% of the brick so I can use it for another project, but I did bend my neighbor's tool. Next, I needed to get the ledger board out, which was so hard. Finally, I got down to these carriage bolts, which were humongous, and then started cutting away the siding where it had moisture intrusion and damage. As you can see here, I take a little peek and I'm like, oh no. I ended up actually having to cut this back all the way down to the studs and replace the gypsum board as well as the siding and do a complete new underlayment system. In addition to the underlayment, I had also found an additional crawl space hole, which I covered up and did mortar and brick. So what I did here was basically I removed all of the damaged siding all the way down to the studs. I didn't get it on video, and then bought an appropriate siding material and replaced it all with a complete like metal flashing around the door. I sealed that all off with flashing tape as well as a Tyvek and a green guard in order to preserve the structure and like prevent future rot. This is a very vulnerable area considering it's around a door. So around doors and windows, it's always really vulnerable. And here I'm thinking about all the decisions I've ever made. This is the end of day 2, and day 3 is coming right up. I mix some mortar and then I do the best I can to masonry this back together. I have a crawl space on the other side of my house, so I don't need this. The following day, so day 4, I start digging. I'm using a standard post hole digger and I'm digging down to 24 inches, installing gravel at the bottom before installing a form. And then this is where I have to get an inspector, right? So anytime that you dig in your yard, you definitely need to check for your power line. So check with your community first, and then you will get your inspector to come look at your holes before you fill them with concrete. My area, the frost line is only 5 inches, but I'm going 24 because I want it to be very robust. I used a 12-inch form, and later I used a jigsaw. That handsaw was not working, and then fit the forms into the holes and leave a bit at the top in order to keep it level. I also level each and measure to make sure that everything is consistent across the board. These roots ruined my day though.
After the inspector gave me the A-OK on my holes, I went ahead and started mixing cement. I did have to do this in a bit of a rush. There was a weather event which would have delayed me 2 weeks, so don't mind my shovel because a lot of people were concerned about that. I am wearing a mask because cement has silica in it, and silica creates little rocks in your lungs, so if you are handling cement, it is a good idea to wear a mask. This is my handy dandy cement shovel. Obviously not the right tool. Later I will get a garden hoe to do my slab for the stairs, but I'm filling the holes and tamping them in with a consistent cement mixture, and then I take a 8-inch hot galvanized dipped bolt and then wet sink it into the footer and make sure that I line it up with my laser. This part is so important because if you don't get them lined up, your post base won't sit correctly. And here's that weather event I was talking about. I did cover my post holes, but I figured if all else fails, I can get playground dinosaurs and just make it a playground back here. Here's my green guard. I worked through the night in order to make sure that I got all of the siding installed so that my house wouldn't get wet after I installed the underlayment system. And now it's time to do gravel. I borrowed a truck and went to Lowe's and I picked up 1,000 pounds of drainage gravel, and then Lowe's was like, what are we gonna do with this whole situation based on the vehicle that I was able to borrow? It had a camper shell, so they were really professional and they made it work, and they made sure that it sat over the axle. However, this man was like, your truck was about to tip over. He is the MVP of Lowe's. Love this man. So next I installed a weed mat and then started to unload the gravel bucket by bucket and wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow. I put it on top of that weed matting. Obviously doesn't need to go over the slab, but I want to make sure that I have good drainage and keep the slope away from the house. At this point, I'm still feeling really optimistic about the project, and I'm very excited when I see this and how nice it looks. Filled with optimism, I went ahead and dry fit my post base and asked Loki to help me, but he did not want to help. He just wants his deck back. After that, I needed to install my piers, so I went ahead and got my 6x6 material and had to buy a new saw because I couldn't make it through with my miter saw, so I used a reciprocating saw. I used my laser to make sure everything was consistent and then started to install the piers to the post base using a roofing felt between the metal and the concrete. Next up, it was time to deal with my slab. This slab ended up being the bane of my existence because that hammer drill was a vibrating POS. So in between it overheating, I went ahead and used copper coat to paint all of my cut-ins because this is code and it's really important to the longevity of your structure so that you don't get moisture intrusion. Next up, because my slab had some cracks in it, I did go ahead and seal those. Also, if you're interested, I have linked my entire shopping list for this entire project in the description. Now, welcome to the Monday School of Pain. After a long weekend of work, this is where I was able to get, and I think it looks so great. I was able to finally get some holes drilled and clean them out with an air blower. And it's hammer drill time again. Don't buy this, I hate it. Just rent a good one. So next up, I install these wedge anchors into the holes that I drilled. I set up a staging area because epoxy dries really quickly. And basically I mix the epoxy and then put it into each of these holes in order to make sure that wedge anchor sits tight. I know that this is a little bit overdone, but I like overkill, so this is how I decided to do it. I went ahead and installed the nut onto the wedge anchors to the distance that I needed to hammer it down so it wouldn't go further than I needed, and then unscrewed the nut before I finished. With my final row of support piers set, it's finally time to dry fit my support beams. So I'm dry fitting here so that I can make sure that everything is consistent with my plans and then start installing. Some of these brackets were super hard to find, so if you are interested, do make sure to check my link because while a lot of the designer tools are great, sometimes you need a good replacement or it doesn't necessarily meet your area's code. So now you can see me struggling for my life lifting these boards after finding the crown. So the crown is like the high side of the board. So you will check for the crown, and the crown always goes up like it's on top of your head, like it deserves to be, babes. DIY can be really hard sometimes and you can really struggle, but at the end of the day, it's so rewarding, and just wait till the end of the video because I get so buff. It's wild. This project took me approximately 43 days from start to finish. I do still have to install the lattice, okay? But you didn't hear that because I don't want to talk about it. Installing these support beams is the most important part, so it's okay to stop and think. Make sure you level throughout the entire process and make sure there's a slight slope away from your house. If you are injured, it's okay. This is your blood sacrifice. Next up, I bring you Kim Glove Boudoir. And if I didn't already mention, copper coat is one of the most important steps in building your deck. It coats the ends or it has to do it again. And if you weren't aware, per code, you should always have pinkies out when handling this material. Because I'm a noob, I've dry fit everything before I did anything. So here is me dry fitting my layout in the middle of a tropical storm because why not? It kind of looks glorious in this rain, doesn't it? The vision is finally visioning and I'm so very excited. So the next steps that I take are making sure that I measure between every single joist. I want to make sure it's super consistent and install the Trex deck tape on the support beams before I install the joists. So now it's time to install the joists and it looks pretty good. The areas where you can see the laser are the high spots, which I'll show you how to deal with later after I do these sister joists because I want to have a picture frame deck. Again, measure all the way through as you're building your substructure. This part is so very important before you start attaching. Now I'm doing hurricane ties. Obviously, I've never done this before, and I broke my clamp while doing it, but hey, things happen. This is DIY. And finally, we get to the sexy part of building where you cut all the lumber to fit, and you show this deck who its daddy is. Boom, baby, literally that easy. It might be illegal to show you this next part because I'm gonna use this huge nail gun to make so much power, so much action happen. Ba-boom! Between each time I toenailed one of these support braces, I made sure to measure and made sure everything was even so that the deck never twists. So this was a really good tool for me because it could get into small spaces. To install this support bracing, I used a hammer and measured to each individual space because things can be a little bit inconsistent if it's off like a 5/8 of an inch. You want to make sure that everything fits right and is level across the deck. So I hammered mine in before toenailing it because my measurements were money and that deserves a hair flip. After I installed the support bracing, this is what it looks like. I think it looks so good. So you remember those red spots when I had the laser on the deck? This is where we're going to deal with that. I planed the deck in order to make it super smooth and consistent and measured and leveled throughout the entire process. Have I mentioned copper coat before? And it's finally time to dry fit. So I dry fit before I use the Trex Protect tape because I didn't want to fold or mess up the tape while I was dry fitting and moving materials around. So now it's time to cut my first board for the picture frame. My inspector had come and inspected the structure and was good with it. He did give me some leeway though because I had not finished the rim joist or the stairs. I pre-drilled the holes and then installed the composite screws to install this board, and my inspector gave me some leeway because he understood that I was on a time crunch and I'd never done this before, so I communicated that with him before he even came. He agreed to inspect the stairs and the slab when he came for his final, so I set up my staging area and used my miter saw to cut all of the boards and get everything ready in order to start installing this deck. Having this staging area was clutch because I'd already lifted this material at least 1,700 times, as you can see demonstrated here. While I've done other DIY projects, this was one of the most major ones that I've ever done, considering that I had to get a whole permit and I had to go through the whole process with the county and pay the fees. So it was a completely new experience, but I think that I slayed it when I made this bench. But make sure to stay tuned because this is a multi-deck loading, baby. Now I'm using the hidden fasteners for Trex decking in between all of the boards, Each board requires a 1/4 of an inch gap. I used a rubber hammer to scare the boards into place to make sure everything was consistent before I started screwing things down, and I also staggered how I screwed them down. So if you can see closely in the video, you'll see that some of the screw tops are still up. That way I can make sure everything is level across the board, and then this is where things went sideways. As I approached the end, I realized that I didn't have the Trex router bit to install the last piece into a square board, so what I ended up doing was just screwing it like I did the first piece before installing the final rim joist here. I used an 8-inch power lag to install the end of the rim joist here to support the stairs and make sure that it was very secure. It's a good deck. She's very strong. She's very robust. She's not like those other decks. She's got all those Trex protects. This next part slapped me in the face at 5 a.m. in the morning, 2 days before my inspector was about to arrive. Did I film this whole thing? No. It was so hard to cut and build stringers. But I love you all, so thank you for being here for this ride and trusting the process. Because I was curious, I dry fit my fascia to see if my math, and it did! And let's face it, I've been outside and dirty for a month, so me and this deck both need a scrub in the crevices. To be honest, I was so excited I couldn't wait to install my patio furniture, and my foreman really wanted to kick back on the porch. Clearly, he is enjoying the sunshine, as are these flowers. And my garden, which is growing profusely at this point in the project. As I waited for my inspector, I did also plant a native garden, which was very exciting, and I spied these blocks at my neighbor's house and asked him if I could have them so I could build another deck. Deck number 2 is loading. So if you remember, I had damaged materials that were delivered to my house, and when I went to talk to Lowe's about it, they were like, hey, like that sucks, I'm so sorry, and they discounted my entire order of Trex boards 75%. In addition to that, they were like, we're not stocking the toasted sand color anymore, so we're just gonna put this extra overstock material on your pallet when we deliver the new stuff. So I had all this extra deck material, and of course I was going to utilize that and make a whole entire second deck for my fireplace area, which was almost free, which was so exciting and allowed me to build this entire permit-free deck in the back area and make it into a fireplace deck. So it turned out so lovely. I am so proud of this space. After which I asked Instagram, should I make an arbor for some really pretty flowers in the spring? And they said astoundingly yes. So I started to build this arbor very chaotically. At this point in the project, I was getting quite slap crazy, and I'll show you a small clip. I am the Wicked Witch of the deck, okay? But it looks so good. It's so nice. I'm so proud of it. I can't wait to paint it and get it ready so that it can be complete and ready for those spring flowers. I think sometimes it can be really intimidating to take on big projects when you don't have any experience with them. But you know what? Just stain it the color of the blood of your enemies and you will be fine. My brush is hard. Why did nobody tell me that staining was literally so easy? This wood had aged in my yard for at least a month, so it was ready to go for stain, and oh my god, it was so easy. Then I made planter boxes so that I could plant my Carolina jasmine in it, and I'm literally so excited. I mean, just look at it. It's so freaking pretty. I fit the fascia and the stairs on and then started to install the fascia to the bottom part of the deck. So I measured, and then we like short skirts over here, so we cut her down. Sometimes you have to scare a board in place with a hammer, and that's okay. Just do a little French tuck afterwards, and then you can install the fascia with these fasteners, which are linked. They're awesome. Absolutely recommend. Once these are secured, you can absolutely never see that they were even drilled at all because you peel the tape off of the Trex fascia and then you install the plugs and use a clean hammer to tap them in, which I'll show you in a second. So these are the plug systems that I used. The Fasten Master ones that are recommended are not available, so get these ones because they are so good. So basically, you just tap them in like that, you wipe the dust off your fascia, and you get on with your day. Now for a sneak peek of the finished product, here is the new stairs and the fascia installed with the planter boxes and automatic solar lighting. I built this out of extra materials that I had for my junk and used a pallet to make this for my barbecue. My dogs are so excited to have the yard back after all that material has been taking up all of their space forever. And of course, because you're at Real Girl DIY and my name is Cynthia Rose, I had to install a signature piece. So I am so excited to show you. I'm thrilled. An honorable mention to my foreman.
Are you a contractor? Yeah, I'm a contractor.
And my mental health as I left this level in the shower after being very tired for many days. And without further ado, here's where we started with this ugly old deck from 35 years ago that was rotting a hole in my house, quite literally, to this stunning masterpiece. I think it turned out absolutely perfect, and my garden has grown to heights bigger than I could have expected, as has my equity. I'd love it if you stayed here with me at Real Girl DIY, so make sure you smash that subscribe button to stay here because we're growing things. And after I'm done with this book, we're restoring my shed and building a whole new deck.